Cardinals Daily Fantasy Team Preview. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Russell Clay, Carson Palmer, David Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald, John Brown, Michael Floyd. A ton of targets, a ton of weapons out there in the desert. Was a very friendly offense. As far as consistency went, Fitzgerald was probably one of the top guys. Obviously, David Johnson there when he got the featured role. But this year, I mean, there are a ton of weapons for Carson Palmer to kind of go after on a week-to-week basis.
You forgot Drew Stanton.
Oh, how could I forget?
11 completions on 25 attempts and 2 interceptions. It's important, man.
Sorry.
That's okay. And when you think about Arizona, Carson Palmer has treated them bad for many years, and this is like a mean boyfriend who's turned over a new leaf. Like, he treated them right last year. Well, he's been injured about 5 of the last 7 years, you know? And Drew Stanton's what you're looking at if he gets hurt, and it all goes down the tubes. So just want that perspective there. But yeah, in terms of this passing game, you look at what Carson Palmer did last year, 35 passing touchdowns, just monstrous numbers, 4,700 passing yards. And honestly, there weren't that many crazy games. It was just consistent every week, 2 to 3 touchdowns, 300 yards, just every single week. And it was incredible for DFS because he was always pretty reasonably priced. And I mean, it's partially him, but it's also partially that he has tremendous receivers and receiving options and a good offensive coordinator and a good head coach. And I mean, it's just a lot of good things in this offense. So I expect this to continue, barring Carson Palmer getting sacked the wrong way in week 1.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement. And it was weird because last year, I mean, there were certain weeks where, as you mentioned, it was like Carson Palmer would throw for 200 and 250 and 2 touchdowns and nothing for the rest of the game. They would just be out so ahead of time, and it was frustrating because you want that upside. And Carson Palmer was a consistent guy, but it was like outside of maybe a couple stacking weekends where you paired him with someone, it was like he wasn't going to win you anything in GPPs just because it was the most consistent, mundane 252 touchdowns that you could ask for.
Oh, no, absolutely, no doubt. Tournaments, you kind of shied away from him after a while because you realize, like, okay, I know what he's getting. But in cash, I mean, it was tremendous, especially, I mean, the last half of the season, Michael Floyd was pretty much underpriced every week. I kind of expect that to be happening with him and John Brown once again this year. In terms of the passing distribution, I don't think Larry Fitzgerald sees 145 targets again. I think we see similar production to what we saw in the second half of the year. Fitz kind of had that 3-touchdown game early in the year, another 2-touchdown game, and then really slowed down in that respect and really slowed down from a targets perspective in the second half. I think we see a really even split between him, Brown, and Floyd. So, I mean, conceivably, we could see 3 guys over 1,000 yards. I do think J.J. Nelson's going to emerge as sort of a deep threat. Maybe he gets 50 to 60 targets. But overall, I mean, I think we see more of the same from this passing offense.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement. And as you mentioned, the Fitzgerald touchdowns, he had 9 receiving last year, were really limited to within just maybe about 3 or 4 weeks there. As you went to the game against Chicago early on in the year where he caught 3, that's a big chunk. Obviously, you know, a good amount of that production already. So I'm definitely in agreement that this is going to be a spread out type of offense. But I would love to see them duplicate the fact that, you know, Larry Fitzgerald 9 touchdowns, John Brown 8 touchdowns, Michael Floyd 8 touchdowns. It would be money again if that type of production was there, and you knew that was going to be the case on a week-to-week basis. But it's not. It's football. Those things are kind of a little bit fluky at times. As you mentioned, you could see some back-end guys. Even a full season with David Johnson might chip into that just a little bit.
Yeah, and John Brown already, it appears, being held out of practice for concussion. So that's definitely something to be worried about. But if it does, I mean, that just shifts Floyd and Fitzgerald into very prominent roles and J.J. Nelson as the deep tournament guy. So pretty straightforward there.
Yeah, it definitely is. And that's one thing where you don't root for injuries, but in the Cardinals' case, if the wide receiver does go down, it makes the other two much more big focal points.
100%. So you're not rooting for it, especially if you own the guy. But if a Michael Floyd goes down, that's Yahtzee for Michael Floyd. If Michael Floyd goes down, that's Yahtzee for John Brown. So, whatever.
Yeah. As far as the tight ends go, I mean, a tight end, I can't even tell you the last time a tight end has had relevance in Arizona. I really can't.
It's not a thing. That's not a thing they do there.
It's like a unicorn. It's just a mystical figure that you don't see. I mean, they have guys. They have them there on the depth chart, so they're still there. You just don't see them in terms of fantasy.
I like Troy Nicholas because I'm a draft position truther, and he was a second-round pick a few years ago. But overall, simply put, he just hasn't been able to stay on the field. I mean, Fells and Gresham are ahead of him for now. So, I mean, if he does emerge, maybe could get 40 targets, but that's the ceiling of what you're looking at there.
Yeah, it definitely is. And looking at the running game, obviously David Johnson was a second-half guy who really emerged and who was just an absolute steal for about 3 or 4 weeks due to the DraftKings pricing. If you didn't play him, you missed out, and you shouldn't have been. You should have been anyway. This year, I mean, there's still names behind him. There's still names in there. It's a pretty loaded depth chart. Could you see Arians doing something wacky where maybe Johnson's not a full-type guy anyway?
I think it's pretty clear David Johnson is the feature guy. I just worry a little bit about maybe falling into a small sample size issue. Obviously, he was tremendous last year. I just think before we put him in the Hall of Fame, we should probably give it a few weeks. In DFS, we don't really have to worry about that. But in terms of this offense, he should get, 20 touches a game if things go correctly, especially if he stays healthy. And, he's going to continue to be an awesome receiving down back and should be pretty good between the tackles as well. So Chris Johnson's going to spell him. Andre Ellington is going to spell him. But other than that, I don't see them affecting his role, really.
Yeah, and that's what you kind of want to hear in coming into the year, because you do like those solidified running back roles where you do want 20 touches, especially a guy who's as versatile as David Johnson is. And obviously a decent offensive line to run behind. It's a very solid spot for Johnson to be in.
Right.
As far as strength of schedule goes, obviously still the AFC West is always going to be a tough option, just given the fact that they are going to be playing some, tougher teams within the division like Seattle, like St. Louis, obviously San Francisco, who's fallen off. But outside of that, not really too tough. Obviously the opener against New England, but not a lot of strong matchups as far as them to really go throughout the year. Pretty average strength of schedule.
Yeah, and the funny thing about the NFC West is the Cardinals are usually the team you're like, crap, they're on the schedule for defense-wise, but they're not the team you're worried about. They just have to play the 49ers and Rams, Obviously, the Seahawks are good, but 49ers and Rams aren't necessarily a bad teams to play twice.
No, definitely not. And as far as the Arizona defense goes, they were one of the better defenses to use. A couple of weeks where they came in as the number one scoring defense. I'm going to be using them probably a lot here. Obviously, as you mentioned, those in-division games against San Francisco and St. Louis are certainly going to be intriguing. But even elsewhere, just as a top 10 defense, they're something I don't really usually target against, unless it's something like a Seattle where maybe it does turn into a possible shootout.
Right, exactly.
So that's going to wrap things up with not the Seattle team preview. It's going to wrap it up with the Arizona team preview. Be sure to check out DavidFantasyCafe.com.